Linari Orvan strode through the crowded promenade of Kreenix's lower district, her presence commanding attention despite her average stature. Her sharp, violet-toned eyes scanned the endless blur of neon lights, towering spires, and alien faces. Vendors hawked exotic wares while hurrying pedestrians skirted past her. They knew better than to cross a bounty hunter. She wasn't here for them, anyway. Her attention was locked on the biotag blinking on her wrist console. The signal came from a small cantina wedged into the corner of a bustling plaza. The fugitive was close. Inside, the cantina was dim and chaotic. Blue-tinged smoke curled up from hookah-like devices at several tables, and alien chatter filled the air. Linari moved through the haze, her boots echoing on the metal floor. Her target, a human male named Nathan Quinn, was supposed to be at the bar. According to her intel, he was wanted for leaking classified corporate data, a contract handed down from a powerful, unnamed client. Linari leaned on the counter, signaling the gruff Jorvian bartender. Seen a human around? Brown hair, about this tall. She gestured with her hand. Goes by Nathan. The bartender glanced up, his 3 yellow eyes narrowing. Why would I tell you, Hunter? Because I'll make it worth your while, Linari replied, slipping a small credit chit onto the bar. The bartender's eyes gleamed, his long fingers pocketing the chit. He tilted his head toward the back. Last booth, far corner. Linari walked over, keeping her movements smooth and deliberate. The closer she got, the clearer the figure in the booth became. Nathan was seated casually, a glass in his hand, but the tension in his posture was obvious. He looked up as she approached, his green eyes narrowing with recognition. Linari Orvan, he said, trying to sound unimpressed. The infamous bounty hunter. I see my reputation precedes me, she said. Her hand hovered near the stun baton on her hip. You can make this easy and come with me quietly, or you could listen to what I have to say first. Nathan leaned forward, lowering his voice. You think I stole that data for personal gain? You're wrong. Linari raised an eyebrow. Is that supposed to convince me to let you go? No, he replied. But what if I told you the people who hired you aren't who they claim to be? Her patience was wearing thin. Every mark has a story. I don't need to hear yours. Nathan smirked faintly. What I have isn't just data. It's proof that your employers are involved in something much bigger. Something that could affect a lot more than just my fate. If you take me in, you're playing into their hands. Linari hesitated, her hand dropping from the baton. Keep talking. Nathan nodded, gesturing to the seat opposite him. I'll explain, but not here. Too many ears. I have a safe house nearby. I'll show you the files there. She studied him for a moment, weighing the risk. Finally, she sat down. If you're lying, you won't get another chance to run. I figured as much. Nathan downed the rest of his drink and stood. Follow me. Linari kept her hand on her weapon, but something in Nathan's demeanor suggested he wasn't bluffing. He wasn't afraid, at least not in the way her usual targets were. As they left the cantina, weaving through the crowded streets, she found herself wondering if she'd just stepped into something far more complex than she'd anticipated. Linari kept her gaze fixed on Nathan's back as they weaved through the maze of streets, her hand hovering near her weapon. The glowing signs of Kreenix's lower districts pulsed with alien scripts, casting the narrow passageways in shifting shades of green and blue. Though she had agreed to hear him out, her mind remained alert. One wrong move, and he'd find himself face down in the dirt. Where's this safe house of yours? She asked. Her tone was cold, but she made sure to keep her voice low. The crowded streets buzzed with activity. Vendors shouting over each other, scavengers picking through refuse, and off-duty factory workers haggling over cheap meals. The last thing she needed was someone overhearing their conversation. Nathan glanced over his shoulder. It's just ahead. Another block. Convenient, Linari muttered. How do I know you're not leading me into a trap? You don't, he replied, a hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. But I'm the one unarmed here, remember? Linari said nothing, but her eyes narrowed. He might not be carrying a weapon, but there were other ways to set a trap. She'd learned the hard way to never underestimate her marks. Still, she followed, watching the street for signs of an ambush. After another few minutes of walking, Nathan stopped in front of a dilapidated building that looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. Its entrance was half obscured by a stack of discarded crates, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb hanging from a rusted fixture above the door. "This is it," Nathan said, stepping aside. "Ladies first." Linari scowled at the obvious attempt at humor. She drew her baton, extending it with a sharp click, and pushed open the door. The inside was as unimpressive as the exterior. A cramped, dimly lit room with peeling walls, a table littered with old data cartridges, and a couch that had clearly seen better days. "You call this a safe house?" she asked, stepping inside carefully. Nathan followed and shut the door behind him. "It's not much, but it keeps me off the grid," he said, moving past her to the table. He rummaged through the clutter, pulling out a small data slate. "This is what I've been trying to protect." Linari watched him, her baton still ready. "You've got 1 minute. Convince me." Nathan set the data slate on the table and activated it. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a series of documents and encrypted communications. He scrolled through them, highlighting lines of text written in various alien languages. "This is what your employer wants to keep hidden. Contracts, financial transactions, and communications between high-ranking officials from several galactic corporations. It's more than just a leak. It's proof of a coordinated effort to manipulate markets, cut off supplies to certain planets, and even incite conflicts." Linari's eyes narrowed. "Why should I believe you? Anyone can forge documents." "You think I haven't thought of that?" Nathan shot back. "That's why I've been on the run. The original source of this data isn't just some anonymous hacker. It's from a whistleblower inside one of those corporations. I've met them. They risked their life to smuggle this out." "You met them?" Linari asked, her tone skeptical. "Where are they now?" "Dead," Nathan said flatly. "And if I don't get this information into the right hands, their death will mean nothing." Linari folded her arms, studying the holograms. It wasn't the first time she'd heard claims like these, but something about Nathan's conviction gave her pause. He wasn't pleading or scrambling to cover his tracks. He was straightforward, calm, and almost too sure of himself. "If you're telling the truth, what do you expect me to do about it?" she said finally. "You've got connections," Nathan replied. "If you can get this data to someone who actually cares, someone who can blow it wide open, then we can expose them before they have a chance to retaliate. I don't care about the credits or my record. I just want this out in the open." Linari sighed. "You're assuming I'd risk my own neck for you." Nathan shrugged. "What's the alternative? Drag me back to your employer so they can silence me and cover this all up? Maybe you don't care about me, but you don't strike me as the type who likes being used." Linari hesitated, the baton still in her hand. Her instincts told her to stun him, collect her bounty, and move on. But something about the look in his eyes, the quiet determination, stayed her hand. "I need to think," she said at last. "Don't make me regret this." "Fair enough," Nathan said. He leaned back against the table, crossing his arms. "You'll see I'm right." Linari gritted her teeth as she and Nathan darted through the narrow streets of Kreenix's lower levels. The sound of heavy boots echoed behind them, accompanied by the metallic whirring of security drones. Her employers weren't wasting time. They wanted Nathan captured, preferably dead, before he could spill what he knew. "This would be so much easier if you just turn yourself in," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder. Nathan, running just ahead of her, shot her a look. "I thought you weren't on their payroll anymore. What happened to hearing me out?" "I'm hearing you," she said. "Doesn't mean I trust you." "Well, at least we have that in common," Nathan muttered. Linari cursed under her breath. They rounded a corner and entered an industrial yard cluttered with rusted shipping containers. Nathan stumbled to a halt, his eyes scanning for an escape route. Linari shoved him forward. "Don't stop. They're right behind us." "Hold on," Nathan said, pointing toward a stack of containers. "There's a maintenance ladder. If we can climb up, we'll have the high ground. That's your plan? She snapped. High ground doesn't mean much when they're armed to the teeth. You got a better idea? Before she could respond, a security drone buzzed into the yard, its floodlights illuminating the area. Lenari's instincts took over. She grabbed Nathan's arm and pulled him into the shadow of the nearest container. Pressing him against the wall, she whispered, "Keep your mouth shut. Let me handle this." Nathan nodded, his breathing shallow. Lenari peeked out from the edge, her hand ready on her baton. The drone hovered closer, scanning the ground. If it spotted them, the ground team would be on them in seconds. She glanced at Nathan, his face half lit by the pale glow of the drone's searchlight. He was still barely daring to breathe. It was strange seeing a human so calm under pressure. Most of the ones she'd encountered in her line of work would be panicking by now. Nathan, on the other hand, seemed to be sizing up the situation just as she was. Lenari waited until the drone moved farther down the yard before gesturing silently. They slipped from the shadows and climbed the maintenance ladder Nathan had spotted. The container wobbled under their weight, but it held. From the top, they had a clear view of the yard below and the approaching security forces. "What now?" Lenari asked. "They'll sweep this whole area." Nathan pointed to a series of cables strung between the containers. "We use those to get to the other side of the yard. There's a service hatch over there that leads into the old utility tunnels." "You really think those cables will hold us?" she said. "You'd rather wait here for them to catch us?" She frowned but said nothing. After a moment, she nodded. "You first." Nathan gripped the cable and swung across to the next container. It sagged under his weight, but he made it safely. Lenari followed, her movements quick and efficient. They continued this way, moving from container to container, until they reached the far side of the yard. "Through here," Nathan said, opening the service hatch. Lenari followed him down into the tunnels, where the noise from above faded to a distant hum. They paused to catch their breath, the dim light from Nathan's wrist-mounted flashlight casting long shadows on the tunnel walls. "You've done this before," Lenari said, watching him. Nathan gave a wry smile. "Living on the run teaches you a few tricks. I still don't understand why you haven't just disappeared," she said. "If what you have is so important, why stick around and risk your neck?" "Because disappearing doesn't solve the problem," he said. "If I run, the people pulling the strings keep doing what they're doing. I'm trying to stop it." Lenari's eyes narrowed. "You sound pretty noble for someone with a price on his head." Nathan shrugged. "Maybe I'm just stubborn." Lenari didn't reply. Instead, she gestured for him to keep moving. "Come on. We're not safe yet." They made their way through the tunnels in silence, their footsteps echoing softly. Though they were miles apart in personality and background, they had one thing in common: survival. They both knew that working together was the only chance they had. Lenari leaned against the cold metal wall of the utility tunnel, arms crossed, as Nathan crouched over the data cache. He fiddled with the device's controls, his expression focused. The faint hum of machinery echoed around them, drowning out the sounds of pursuit, at least for now. "You're sure that thing can't be traced?" she asked, her tone sharp. Nathan glanced up, meeting her gaze. "Relax. I know what I'm doing." "Every time you say that, things get worse," Lenari shot back. "You're lucky I haven't stunned you and handed you over. And you're lucky I haven't just run off on my own," Nathan said, raising an eyebrow. "You know as well as I do that you need me." "I don't need anyone," Lenari retorted. She pushed off the wall and started pacing, her boots clanging softly against the metal floor. "But I'm not an idiot. I know you're my best shot at figuring out what's really going on." Nathan returned his attention to the cache, but she could tell he was holding back a smirk. She didn't appreciate the smugness, but he wasn't wrong. Her employers had made it clear: bring Nathan in, or don't come back. But after everything she'd seen, after what he'd shown her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been used as a pawn in something much bigger. "What's the next step?" Lenari asked, stopping just behind him. "You've got the data. We're still alive." "What now?" Nathan sighed, sitting back on his heels. We need a way to get this information out. Not just to the public, but to someone who can do something about it. Good luck with that, Linari muttered. Half the galaxy's media outlets are bought and paid for by the same corporations you're trying to expose. And the other half wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm not talking about media, Nathan said. He gestured at the cache. I have contacts. People who can verify this data and get it into the hands of someone with actual power. More running than, Linari said. More running, Nathan agreed. Unless you've got a better plan? She shook her head. No, but I have a feeling your contacts are going to be just as eager to stab us in the back as my employers. Nathan's smirk returned. You're a ray of sunshine, you know that? Call it realism, she said flatly. It's what's kept me alive this long. Fair enough, Nathan said. He closed the cache and stood, brushing off his hands. Either way, we have to keep moving. The longer we stay in one place, the easier it'll be for them to find us. As they prepared to move out, Linari couldn't help but glance at him again. There was something about his determination, his unwavering focus on the mission, that irritated her. It reminded her too much of herself, always pushing forward no matter the cost. Hey, she said suddenly, stopping him as he reached for his gear. Why are you doing this? Really? He paused, looking at her. What do you mean? Why not just run? Disappear somewhere no one would find you? She asked. You have to know you're putting a target on your back for the rest of your life. Nathan hesitated, his usual confidence faltering for a brief moment. Because someone has to. These corporations, these alliances, they're not just making money. They're destroying entire civilizations. And if I can do something, anything, to stop it, then I have to. Linari stared at him, studying his face. He wasn't lying. That much she was sure of. And for the first time, she found herself questioning her own motivations. Was she just another cog in the machine, following orders without questioning why? Well, she said after a long silence. Let's see if your idealism gets us killed. Nathan smiled faintly. Let's see if your cynicism saves our skins. Let's just move, she said, grabbing her gear. As they set off deeper into the tunnels, she felt a strange sense of unease. One that had nothing to do with the danger ahead. Linari and Nathan had finally found a moment of quiet after days of constant pursuit. They holed up in a small, abandoned maintenance station, hidden away from the security forces combing the tunnels. The room smelled of oil and rust, the faint hum of old machinery the only sound in the air. It wasn't much, but it was enough to let them catch their breath. Nathan sat cross-legged on the floor, his datapad resting on his knees. You don't have to keep standing there like you're guarding a vault, he said, glancing at Linari. We're safe here. For now. Safe is relative, Linari replied, her back against the wall. Her eyes scanned the room's shadowy corners, the distrust never leaving her expression. Have you ever tried just relaxing? Nathan asked with a raised eyebrow. Relaxing gets you killed, Linari shot back. I've survived by not letting my guard down. Nathan tilted his head, watching her for a moment. You know, not everything has to be life or death. There's such a thing as a middle ground. Linari crossed her arms. Spoken like someone who's never had to live with a target on their back. Nathan smirked faintly. Are you kidding? I've had a target on my back for years. But unlike you, I'm not planning to let it ruin what time I've got left. She narrowed her eyes at him. And what exactly do you have left, Nathan? A lifetime of running, never knowing who's going to betray you next. He shrugged. Maybe. But at least I'll know I tried to do something meaningful before it's all over. Linari fell silent, the weight of his words settling between them. She hated to admit it, but there was something about Nathan's attitude that made her question her own choices. She'd spent years focused solely on survival, shutting out everything else. But what had it gotten her? Is that why you keep dragging me into this mess? She asked. Because you think I'll start caring about your cause? Nathan leaned back against the wall, meeting her gaze. I'm not trying to change you, Linari. I just need someone who knows how to handle themselves. Someone I can trust. She barked out a dry laugh. Trust me? You've got a strange way of showing it. Hey, you're still here, Nathan said with a grin. That counts for something, doesn't it? Linari didn't respond, but she found herself smirking despite herself. Maybe it was the exhaustion finally getting to her. Or maybe she just appreciated that someone, for once, wasn't trying to manipulate her. At least not entirely. After a long pause, she nodded toward the datapad. What's the plan now? Nathan tapped the screen. I've been trying to reach my contact, but it's slow going. They're in a secure location, and I don't want to broadcast too much. But if I can get through, we'll have a shot at exposing everything. And what happens if we don't? Linari asked. Then we keep going, Nathan said simply. One step at a time. She frowned. Not much of a plan. It's better than no plan at all, he replied. You've been in tight spots before. You know how this works. Linari rolled her eyes. Fine, but don't expect me to start believing in some miracle turnaround. This whole thing could blow up in our faces at any moment. Nathan's grin returned. Sounds like you're starting to think like me. Don't push your luck, she warned. The room fell quiet again. D Factory's storage wing, her sharp eyes scanning the rows of dormant machinery. The air smelled of coolant and dust. The only sound a faint hum of overhead lights long overdue for maintenance. Nathan knelt a few paces away, hunched over his data slate, the screen casting faint blue light over his features. Any luck? She asked, her voice a low whisper. He shook his head without looking up. Their system's tougher than I expected. Either they've upgraded since I was last here, or someone got paranoid. Linari narrowed her eyes. You said this place would be easy to break into. I said it would be easier, Nathan corrected. Not a cakewalk. Anyway, you're the one who insisted on coming in the front. I'd rather deal with their security bots than risk you tripping an alarm, she muttered. He gave her a sidelong glance. You don't trust me yet? After all we've been through. Not in the slightest, Linari replied. Now stop talking and get that done before someone shows up. Nathan smirked and returned his focus to the slate. She was all business as usual, but he could tell she wasn't as cold as she pretended to be. Over the past few days, he'd seen cracks in her icy exterior, small, fleeting moments where her tough persona slipped, like how she stayed up watching the entry points while he slept, or how she never let him go anywhere without at least scouting the area first. Got it, Nathan said after a long silence. The control panel's unlocked. We just need to reach it. Linari straightened, her hand going to the grip of her weapon. Good. Where is it? Far end of the wing, he said, nodding toward a set of catwalks above the machinery. We can take the upper route. Should keep us out of sight. Lead the way, she said, gesturing for him to move. They climbed the rusted stairs quietly, their boots barely making a sound. As they ascended, Linari kept her eyes moving, scanning for any signs of movement. This place was supposed to be abandoned, but she knew better than to trust appearances. Nathan reached the catwalk first, crouching low and motioning for her to follow. He pointed toward a control station at the far end, its lights faintly flickering. That's it, he whispered. Linari nodded and crept forward, her weapon drawn. Nathan stayed close, his breath steady as he glanced back at her. You've got a knack for sneaking, he said softly. Part of the job, she replied, her voice barely audible. Stay quiet. They moved in silence, the creaking of the catwalk their only companion. When they reached the control station, Nathan dropped to one knee and began working on the console. Linari kept watch, her senses sharp. She didn't trust the stillness. In her experience, it always meant trouble was just around the corner. How much longer? She asked, her gaze darting between the shadows below. Almost there, Nathan murmured. Just need to bypass. A sudden clank echoed through the wing, cutting him off. Both of them froze. Linari's grip tightened on her weapon as she scanned the area below. In the dim light, she spotted a pair of security drones gliding between the machinery. Their searchlights swept the floor, illuminating the dust hanging in the air. They're here, she whispered. Nathan looked up from the console, his expression tense. Can you handle them? Of course I can handle them, Linari said. Keep working. I'll take care of this. She moved quickly and quietly along the catwalk, positioning herself above the drones. Drawing a small, silent projectile from her belt, she aimed carefully and fired. The first drone sparked and spun out of control, crashing into a cluster of crates below. The second drone whirled around, its spotlight swinging toward the sound. Before it could react, Linari had already lined up her next shot. A soft click and the drone tumbled to the ground. She watched for a moment, ensuring they weren't followed by more. All clear, she called softly, heading back to the control station. Nathan glanced at her as she approached, a faint smirk on his face. You really don't miss, he said. Not when it counts, Linari replied. Now finish up before more show up. Nathan turned back to the console, typing rapidly. After a few moments, the display on his data slate changed, and he gave a small nod. Got it. The data's secured, and I've wiped their local records. They won't be able to trace us. Linari raised an eyebrow. You sure? Positive, Nathan said. Now let's get out of here. They descended the catwalk and made their way back through the factory, their steps quick and quiet. As they slipped out through a side entrance, Linari cast one last glance over her shoulder. The drones lay in ruins, the machinery silent once more. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small, fleeting sense of relief. Not that she'd admit it to Nathan, of course. The cramped shuttle hummed softly as it powered through the void of space, leaving the chaos of Kreenix behind. Nathan sat hunched over a portable terminal, scrolling through lines of code with a furrowed brow. Linari leaned back in the pilot's seat, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the armrest. Anything yet? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. Still parsing, Nathan replied without looking up. Give it a minute. Linari sighed, her gaze drifting to the viewport. The stars outside remained steady, their cold light piercing the darkness. She'd spent so much of her life running from or chasing someone that the concept of simply sitting still felt almost alien. The quiet made her uneasy. What's our next move? Nathan finally asked, breaking the silence. We find out where your contact is and deliver that data, Linari said. Simple. Nathan stopped typing and looked at her. If it's so simple, why do you look like you're ready to jump out of your skin? I'm always ready to jump out of my skin, Linari replied dryly. Part of the job. Sure it's not just me getting on your nerves? Nathan said with a faint smile. She turned to him, one eyebrow raised. You're always on my nerves, Quinn. But that's not what's bothering me. So what is? He asked, his tone serious now. Linari hesitated, her fingers stilling. We've been in the middle of things for so long that sitting here feels wrong. I keep expecting another ambush, another chase. This calm is too quiet. Nathan studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his seat. Maybe we could use a little quiet. Don't count on it, she said. If your contact doesn't come through, we'll be back in the thick of it before you know it. Nathan didn't argue. Instead, he returned to his terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. You're not wrong, he said after a moment. But at least we have a direction now. That's better than we had before. Linari tilted her head, watching him. For someone who had spent so much time on the run, Nathan didn't seem as worn down as she expected. He still had that spark of determination in his eyes, a quiet defiance that she couldn't help but notice. What about you? She asked suddenly. What's next for you if this all works out? Nathan looked up, surprised by the question. Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. She narrowed her eyes. Not like you to not have a plan. He shrugged. This has been my plan for so long. I don't know what comes after. Maybe I'll find a quiet corner of the galaxy and disappear. Or maybe I'll find something new to fight for. Linari snorted. You make it sound easy. It's not, Nathan admitted. But sometimes you just have to take things one step at a time. She rolled her eyes. You sound like a self-help manual. Maybe I've got a future in motivational speeches, Nathan said with a smirk. Linari shook her head, but a faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Just focus on the data, Quinn. Leave the motivational speeches to someone else. Sure thing, boss, he said, returning his attention to the terminal. The silence returned, but it felt less oppressive this time. Linari settled into her seat, her eyes drifting to the stars again. The uneasy feeling lingered, but for now, she let it be. They had a plan, however fragile. That would have to be enough. The final step of the journey took Linari and Nathan deep into the core system, where the sprawling orbiting platforms of the galactic hubs gleamed in the light of a distant sun. Their target was Station Velkarn, an independent outpost notorious for black market dealings and under-the-table transactions. It was exactly the kind of place Nathan's contact would blend into, assuming the contact hadn't vanished or worse, been bought off. Linari guided their shuttle into a docking slip and shut down the engines. Her expression was as calm and focused as always, but Nathan could feel the tension radiating off her. "You ready?" he asked, standing and slinging a small pack over his shoulder. She gave him a sharp look. "I'm always ready." Nathan smirked faintly. "Good to know. Let's hope your contact lives up to the hype." "They will," Linari said. "And if they don't, we'll make them." He raised his hands. "I'll let you handle that part. My job's just to deliver the data." As they stepped out into the station's main concourse, the oppressive atmosphere of Velkarn hit them immediately. The air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and ozone, and the murmur of countless voices echoed through the labyrinth of narrow corridors and overlapping walkways. The station was a tangled mass of commerce, with vendors hawking everything from exotic weapons to pirated software. Security was minimal. Law and order here were maintained by unspoken agreements and the occasional flash of violence. Nathan stayed close to Linari as she led the way. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd, and her hand never strayed far from the stun baton at her hip. Despite the noise and chaos, she moved with purpose, weaving through the throng as if she'd walked these halls 100 times before. Their destination was a small, nondescript cantina tucked away in the lower levels. Linari paused outside the door, her gaze narrowing as she studied the dimly lit interior. She tapped a small device on her wrist, scanning for surveillance or potential threats. "Anything?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice low. "Nothing out of the ordinary," she replied. "But that doesn't mean it's safe. I'll follow your lead." Linari nodded once and stepped inside. The cantina was smoky and dim, filled with patrons speaking in hushed tones. The bartender, a grizzled reptilian with dull silver scales, barely glanced up as they entered. Linari headed straight for a booth in the far corner, where a figure sat hunched over a drink. Nathan followed, his heartbeat quickening. The contact, a wiry humanoid with pale green skin and deep-set black eyes, glanced up as they approached. "Linari Orvin," the figure said, their voice a dry rasp. "I heard you'd gone rogue." "Only if you believe the corporate feeds," Linari said, sliding into the booth. "You have what we need?" The contact's gaze flicked to Nathan. "And this is the infamous human who started all the trouble?" Nathan took the seat across from them. "Guilty as charged." The contact chuckled dryly. "You've stirred up quite a mess. But yes, I have what you're looking for. The comm lines are secure, the delivery channels open. Once I have the data, I'll send it to the right places." Nathan set the data slate on the table and slid it across. "Everything you need is here. Make sure it goes out fast. If they realize what we've done before it's live, we're all dead." The contact picked up the slate, their long fingers skimming the surface as they verified the contents. "It'll take a few minutes to encrypt and transmit. Sit tight." Nathan leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time in days, it felt like progress. Linari, however, remained tense. Her eyes never stopped scanning the room. "If they sent anyone to intercept us, it'll happen soon." "Always the optimist," Nathan murmured. "I'm a realist," she said sharply. "And right now, reality says we're still in danger." He couldn't argue with that. The station's chaotic, unregulated nature was a double-edged sword. Great for hiding, but terrible if someone decided to cash in on a bounty. Nathan kept one hand near his sidearm, his senses on high alert. Minutes crawled by like hours. The contact worked in silence, the faint glow of the data slate illuminating their face. Nathan fidgeted, glancing at Linari, who remained as still and focused as a coiled spring. He found himself grateful she was on his side, at least for now. Finally, the contact set the slate down. "It's done," they said. "The data's out. Even if they track us down, it's too late to stop it." Nathan felt a wave of relief wash over him. "So that's it. That's it," the contact confirmed. "But don't think it's over. Once this information spreads, there'll be fallout. People will come looking for you." Linari stood, her eyes hard. "Let them come. I'll deal with it." Nathan got up as well, his expression more cautious. "What about you?" he asked the contact. "Aren't you worried?" The contact chuckled again. "Worried? Always. But this is what I do. Now go. The longer you stay here, the worse it'll be." Linari nodded. "Come on, Nathan. We're leaving." As they made their way out of the cantina, Nathan glanced at her. "What now?" "We get out of this system," Linari said. "And after that, we figure out what's next." "Still no long-term plan, huh?" he said with a faint smile. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. One step at a time. They disappeared into the crowded corridors of Velkarn, leaving the chaos behind, at least for now.